He regarded himself as standing at the summit of a huge moral system, subordinate to the idea of a universal, transcendent power, that of God.
Of noble birth, he was sworn to serve his Lord and to take up arms with God's blessing. This was the code of chivalry. Across Europe, this new breed of warrior saw himself as defender of God's church and protector of his earthly Lord's land. The power base of the medieval knight was protected by stone walls. Lesser knights built fortified houses. Great aristocrats built vast castles at enormous expense. When William the Conqueror divided England among his followers, he allowed them to build castles to defend their new holdings, 900 of them in 100 years. They protected vulnerable coastline from invasion and inland towns from attack. The castles were not only forts, they were also arsenals containing a grisly stockpile of weapons. By the 13th century, knights fortified their own bodies with plate armor. Weighing over 60 pounds, it was cumbersome but essential. It also was expensive. Knightly combat pitted gentlemen against gentlemen. Thus equipped, the medieval knight rode to battle. But the reality of chivalrous knightly combat was anything but romantic. It was a brutal hand-to-hand affair. But the spread of the castle meant that most medieval warfare was siege rather than pitched battle. In siege warfare, the horse was a food-consuming liability rather than an asset. Knights devised other means of attack. They dug tunnels to undermine foundations. They even adopted rules for the conduct of sieges, the Code of Deuteronomy. Derived from the Old Testament, it decreed that a garrison surrendering quickly would be treated more leniently than one that did not. The longer defenders held out, the heavier the price they would pay. Rape, pillage, murder.
Since siege is immensely dangerous to those who attack, those who resist attack must bear the consequences if they prolong resistance. So it's really a challenge to those inside to gamble of prolonging resistance and holding out, or might it not be better to capitulate at the very beginning and make a decent bargain with those outside?
Prolonging a siege increased the ever-present danger of disease, and from Roman times, an early form of biological warfare was to catapult rancid animal carcasses over the walls to start an epidemic.
For the people inside, the great problems were, one, is there enough food? Is there enough water? And is there going to be a contagious illness? Certainly the diarrheas, dysenteries would have been common. If a contagious disease like smallpox had arisen, it would have certainly decimated the town. A besieging army, almost by definition, stays within a very close distance, an unhealthy circumstance for any prolonged siege. Epidemic typhus, louse-borne typhus, in a lousy army, once started, broke up many a siege.
In siege warfare, speed was essential. Both sides reached for new weapons. The crossbow arrived in Europe 1,500 years after its appearance in China. At first, it was banned by the Pope as too lethal to be Christian, but it was too lethal to resist. Loaded like a handgun and released mechanically, the crossbow had a slower rate of fire than the longbow, but it was easy to use and perfect for siege, where there was time to angle for a good shot.
It's certainly true that the weapon which allowed an untrained or partially trained man to kill a distinguished warrior at a distance grossly violated the idea of honor, particularly as it had come to be observed in the High Middle Ages. The knights of chivalry thought it absolutely appalling. They thought it disgraceful that a crossbowman should be able to kill a mounted nobleman. And they treated crossbowmen and archers and others who used long-distance weapons peremptorily. They felt no dishonor at all in killing them out of hand if they were taken prisoner.
There was one enemy against which the Pope's ban had never applied: Islam. Now, 300 years after the Arab invasion of Spain, Christian knights were set on revenge. Since the fall of Rome in 476, Europe had been under constant attack from barbarian forces. Now the West would mount a holy war of its own, the Crusades. The Crusades to reclaim the Holy Land from Islam lasted 300 years. They were ultimately a failure, but allowed the Christian knight to perfect the chivalric ideal. But the Christian soldiers were not the only mounted warriors following a knightly code. On the other side of the world, another way of the mounted warrior had grown up. The code of this military